The morning mist slowly rose along the slopes of Napa Valley, enveloping the Blackwood mansion like a veil of melancholy. It was March, and the California autumn painted the vineyard leaves with golden hues that reflected on the dark granite of the century-old building. That house, which had sheltered 3 generations of the Blackwood family, now echoed only with Robert's measured steps and the discreet whispers of the staff who kept the routine running like a Swiss clock. Robert Blackwood always woke at 5:30 in the morning, not from discipline, but because sleep had become an inhospitable territory. The pancreatic cancer, discovered 8 months earlier, had transformed his body into a devastated land where each cell waged a silent war. At 63, he still maintained the upright posture he had inherited from his father, but his grey eyes carried the weight of someone who had already given up the battle. On that specific morning, while observing the vineyard stretching as far as the eye could see from his office window, Robert knew something would change. It wasn't premonition, it was exhaustion. Exhaustion from living like a ghost in his own home. Exhaustion from pretending that chemotherapy still made sense. Exhaustion from seeing in the doctor's eyes that pity disguised as hope. The decision had been made the previous week, during a consultation in San Francisco. The oncologist, a man too young to speak about death so naturally, had said that there were perhaps 4 months left, perhaps 6. "We can try a more aggressive approach," he had suggested, leafing through medical records as if consulting a menu. Robert had stood up mid-sentence and left without explanation. He didn't want to die in a hospital bed, with tubes and machines dictating the rhythm of his farewell. He wanted to die at home, among the stones he knew, breathing the air that carried the sweet smell of grapes and the memory of Elizabeth. Elizabeth. 25 years had passed since the accident, but the name still echoed through the house like an unanswered prayer. She and Thomas, their 12-year-old son, were returning from a trip to Lake Tahoe when the car skidded in the rain and plunged down an embankment. Robert had stayed home, taking care of business, always taking care of business. Guilt accompanied him like a shadow, whispering in moments of silence that perhaps if he had gone along, things would be different. After the funeral, Robert closed himself off. Not physically, the winery continued to grow, business prospered, vintages were internationally awarded. But emotionally, he built walls as high as those surrounding the property. He had relationships, of course, sophisticated women of his social class who understood the rules of the game and didn't ask for more than he was willing to give. But love? Love was forbidden territory, a scar he refused to pick at. It was Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper, who had been caring for the home for 15 years, who suggested hiring someone younger to help her. "You're going to need special care in the coming months," she had said with the frankness of someone who had carte blanche to speak inconvenient truths. "And I no longer have the age or energy to handle everything alone." Robert had agreed out of laziness, laziness to argue, laziness to explain that he didn't want strangers circulating around the house, laziness to admit that maybe he did need help. Mrs. Martha took care of everything, as always. She said she knew a young woman through the Sisters of St. Mary's Convent in Sonoma. A serious, discreet young woman, accustomed to silence and work. "She's an orphan," Mrs. Martha explained one February morning, serving coffee on the porch. "Raised by the sisters since she was little. She worked in a family home in San Francisco, but the lady of the house died and the children sold everything. She needs a place." Robert had shrugged. As long as the girl didn't make noise or try to establish unnecessary conversations, it made no difference. The house was big enough that they wouldn't even cross paths, if necessary. On the day Sarah arrived, Robert was in his office, reviewing export contracts to Argentina. It was a grey March afternoon with that cold wind that announced the proximity of winter. He heard Mrs. Martha's car climbing the cobblestone road, but he didn't bother to look out the window. He continued working, trying to concentrate on the numbers that danced before his tired eyes. It was the silence that intrigued him first. Mrs. Martha usually received people with a torrent of instructions and comments, her voice echoing through the corridors like an out-of-tune bell. But this time, all he heard were light steps climbing the main staircase and the muffled noise of a suitcase being dragged across the wooden floor. Curiosity. How long had it been since he'd felt curiosity about anything? At dinner time, Sarah appeared for the first time. Mrs. Martha brought her to the dining room as if presenting a new piece of furniture. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Sarah Miller, the young woman who's come to help us." Robert raised his eyes from the risotto plate he had barely touched and saw her. Sarah was standing beside the table, with her hands interlaced in front of her body, wearing a simple navy blue dress that seemed to have been tailored to not draw attention. She was pretty, but with a contained beauty, almost apologetic. Brown hair tied in a low bun, no makeup, dark eyes that didn't flee from eye contact but also didn't challenge. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," she said, and her voice had that rare quality of someone who speaks only when they have something to say. "Good evening," replied Robert, and went back to distractedly stirring the risotto. But while Mrs. Martha explained the routines of the house and mealtimes, he continued observing Sarah from the corner of his eye. There was something about her that bothered him, but he couldn't identify what. Perhaps it was the way she listened, with full attention, as if every word was important. Or perhaps it was the fact that she didn't seem intimidated by the grandeur of the house or impressed with his person. In the following days, Robert began to notice Sarah's presence as a subtle change in the atmosphere of the mansion. It wasn't anything obvious. She fulfilled her functions with the silent efficiency of a shadow. But there were fresh flowers in vases that used to be empty. Curtains were opened at angles that allowed just the right amount of morning light, and coffee came to the table at a perfect temperature that Mrs. Martha had never managed to get right. It was as if Sarah understood the rhythms of the house better than those who had lived in it for decades. One morning, Robert found her in the library. She was standing in front of the tallest shelf, trying to reach a book that had been misplaced. She wore a grey dress that accentuated the discreet curve of her waist, and was on tiptoe stretching her arm in a precarious balance dance. "Need help?" asked Robert, appearing at the door like an apparition. Sarah turned, startled, and for an instant lost her balance. Robert took 2 quick steps and held her arm, stabilizing her. It was a brief professional touch, but something passed between them at that moment, a spark of recognition that neither knew how to interpret. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," said Sarah, regaining her composure. "I was trying to organize the books by author, as Mrs. Martha asked, but this one—" "Henry James," said Robert, reaching for the book without effort and handing it to her. "The Portrait of a Lady. Have you read it?" "Yes, sir. Several times." "And what did you think of Isabel Archer?" The question came out without him planning it. There was something in Sarah's expression that made him want to know how her mind worked, what kind of universe existed behind those cautious eyes. Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if evaluating whether it was appropriate to have an opinion about literature in front of her employer. "I think she was guilty," she said finally, "but not of what people accused her." Robert raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "She was guilty of being born a woman in a time when that was enough to be condemned, guilty of being too intelligent to pretend she didn't understand the game, guilty of having eyes that said more than they should." The response caught him off guard. Not because of the intelligence, he had intuited that Sarah was more complex than she appeared, but because of the melancholy that tinged her words, as if she spoke from personal experience. "Interesting," murmured Robert. "And do you identify with her?" Sarah put the book on the shelf with excessive care, avoiding looking at him directly. "Sometimes I think all women identify with Isabel Archer, Mr. Blackwood. The difference is that some have the courage to admit it." She left the library, leaving a trail of discreet perfume and a strange feeling in Robert's chest. It was as if a small bomb had exploded in a territory he had declared a dead zone decades ago. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He stood on the bedroom balcony, smoking a cigarette he knew he shouldn't smoke, watching the city lights twinkling in the valley. He thought about Isabel Archer, thought about Elizabeth, thought about Sarah's dark eyes and the way she had said, "Sometimes I think." There was a loneliness in those words that echoed his own loneliness, a mutual recognition of souls that had learned to protect themselves behind masks. In the following days, Robert began to look for small opportunities to cross paths with Sarah. He didn't plan this consciously, but found himself having breakfast later, just to see her arranging flowers in the living room, or staying longer in the library, pretending to read, while she worked silently around him. Sarah, in turn, seemed to notice these casual encounters, but never gave any sign that she considered them intentional. She always maintained the respectful distance, the formal tone, the discreet efficiency. But there were moments, a look that lasted half a second too long, an almost imperceptible smile when he made an ironic comment about the weather, when Robert felt that she was paying attention too. It was on an April afternoon, when rain was drumming on the mansion's windows and the wind made tree branches dance like ghosts, that everything changed. Robert had spent the morning with the doctor in Sonoma. The consultation had been devastating. The tumor had grown, time had shortened, options had run out. The doctor talked about palliative care, about quality of life, about enjoying the time left, words that sounded like euphemisms for "you're going to die and there's nothing we can do about it." He returned home in a somber state of mind, a mixture of anger and despair that he hadn't felt since the first months after Elizabeth's death. Mrs. Martha tried to serve him lunch, but he dismissed everything and locked himself in his office with a bottle of red wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon from the 2018 vintage that he had saved for a special occasion. Special occasion. As if the proximity of death could be considered a celebration. He was on his third glass when Sarah appeared at the door. She didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just materialized there as if she had been summoned by some infallible instinct. "You didn't eat lunch," she said, without preamble. "I'm not hungry," replied Robert, without lifting his eyes from the documents he pretended to read. "And that wine isn't going to solve anything." The frankness of the observation made him raise his head. Sarah was standing on the threshold with a tray in her hands. She didn't seem embarrassed or intimidated by his incipient drinking. Just sad, as if she perfectly understood the territory in which he found himself. "Do you know something about not solving anything?" asked Robert with bitter irony. "I know enough to recognize when someone is trying to drown sorrows," replied Sarah, entering the office and placing the tray on the side table. "And I know that it never works." "Oh, really? And how do you know?" Sarah looked at him directly for the first time since she had arrived at the house. Her dark eyes had a depth that surprised him, as if they held stories she had never told anyone. "Because I've tried it," she said simply. There was a long silence charged with unplanned intimacy. Robert realized he was seeing Sarah for the first time, not as an employee or a discreet presence, but as a person with her own wounds, her own attempts at escape, her own failures to find consolation. "What happened today?" asked Sarah, and there was a genuine gentleness in her voice that made something contract in Robert's chest. He could have lied. He could have made up some excuse about business or family problems. But there was something in the way she asked, without morbid curiosity or pity, just with the patience of someone who is willing to listen, that disarmed him completely. "The doctor said I have 3 months," said Robert, and it was the first time he had spoken these words aloud. "Maybe 4, if I'm lucky." Sarah didn't gasp, didn't show shock or pity. She just nodded slowly, as if this information explained many things she had already noticed. "And that scares you?" she asked. "No," replied Robert, and he was surprised by the honesty of the answer. "What scares me is dying without having lived anything that mattered in the last 25 years. Sarah approached the desk and served 2 cups of coffee from the thermos she had brought. She offered one to Robert, who accepted it automatically. "What would living something that mattered be?" she asked, sitting in the armchair in front of the desk. It was a simple question, but Robert felt as if he had been hit by lightning. When was the last time someone had cared enough to ask a true question about his feelings, his desires, his regrets? "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty of this confession left him exposed in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. "Before I thought I knew. I thought it mattered to build something, to leave a legacy, to make the winery prosper. But now I think maybe I've confused building things with building a life." Sarah drank the coffee in small sips, her eyes never leaving Robert's face. There was an attentive quality to her listening that made him feel as if his words were important, as if she was really interested in understanding the complex universe of his contradictions. "And what would building a life be like?" she asked. Robert laughed, but it was a laugh without humor. "That's a curious question coming from someone who works in someone else's house and sleeps in a maid's room." It was an unnecessary cruelty, and he knew it the moment the words left his mouth. He expected Sarah to be offended, to stand up and leave, restoring the safe distance between them. But she just smiled, a sad smile but without resentment. "Touché," she said. "But maybe that's exactly why I can ask the question. Someone who's never had anything isn't afraid to imagine what it would be like to have everything. The response disarmed him again. There was an unexpected wisdom in those words, an ability to transform vulnerability into strength that he recognized but didn't know how to name. "Were you always like this?" asked Robert. "Like what?" "Able to find the philosophical side of bad things." Sarah reflected for a moment, absently stirring the empty cup. "The sisters who raised me said that God gives us exactly the tools we need to survive. I never had enough beauty to be desired, or enough money to be envied, or enough family to be protected. So I developed other things." "What other things?" "The ability to observe, to understand what people really want, behind what they say they want, to find beauty in places where no one else looks." Robert studied her for a long moment. There was truth in those words, but also a deep melancholy that she tried to disguise with acceptance. Sarah had learned to transform abandonment into independence, loneliness into wisdom, rejection into understanding. But the cost of that transformation was written in the cautious way she moved through the world, always prepared to be dismissed, always too grateful for small kindnesses. "And what do you see when you observe me?" he asked, with an impulsiveness that surprised him. Sarah looked at him directly, and for the first time since she had arrived at the house, Robert saw something beyond respectful caution in her eyes. He saw a sharp intelligence, a perception that went far beyond what he had imagined. "I see a man who built a fortress so perfect that he forgot to leave a door to get out," she said, "and who is now discovering that all the things he accumulated inside are worth nothing if there's no one to share them with." The silence that followed was dense, charged with a truth that Robert wasn't prepared to face. He got up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the vineyards. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey, foreshadowing more storms. "And if I said I don't want to die alone?" he asked without turning around. "I would say that no one should die alone," replied Sarah, and her voice reached him soft as a whisper. "And if I said, I'm not just talking about having someone around when it happens?" There was a long pause. Robert could feel Sarah processing the implications of the question, weighing her words before answering. "What are you talking about then?" Robert turned to face her. Sarah was still sitting, but there was a new tension in her posture, an awareness that the conversation had entered dangerous territory. "I'm talking about feeling something true before I go. I'm talking about touching someone, being touched, not just physically, but completely. I'm talking about remembering what it's like to be alive." The words came out in a torrent, as if they had been dammed up for years, and finally found a crack to escape through. Robert saw Sarah pale slightly, saw her hands contract slightly on her legs. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "I know how this sounds. I know it seems like the last whim of a rich man trying to buy what he never had, but it's not like that, Sarah. It's panic. Panic about disappearing, without having really existed for someone." Sarah got up slowly, as if each movement was carefully calculated. Her expression was impenetrable, but Robert could see the conflict in her eyes. "What exactly are you asking me?" she asked, and her voice was lower now, almost a whisper. Robert felt his heart speed up. It was now or never. 3 months to live, maybe less, and he was wasting time with social conventions and fear of embarrassment. "One night," he said. "Just one night. With you." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of the words. When she opened them again, there was something different in them. Not anger, not disgust, but a deep sadness that cut him more than any rejection could have done. "No," she said softly. "I won't give you my body out of pity." The answer was exactly what he expected, but it still hurt in a way that surprised him. Robert nodded, preparing to apologize, to try to restore some dignity to the impossible situation he had created. But then Sarah continued speaking. "But I can offer you my presence, if you'll accept it." Robert stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a step forward, and there was a new determination in her posture, as if she had reached a decision that surprised her as much as it did him. 30 days, she said. 30 days of true coexistence. Not as employer and employee, but as people. Real conversations, shared silences, stories told without masks. At the end of that time, if I want to, only if I want to, I may choose to spend that night with you. Robert felt the world reorganize around that proposal. It was much more than he had asked for, and at the same time, something completely different. Sarah wasn't offering her body as a concession to his mortality. She was offering something infinitely more dangerous, the possibility of real intimacy. "Why?" he asked. Sarah smiled for the first time since the conversation began, a small smile but genuine. "Because I also don't want to die without having experienced something true," she said. "And you may not be the person I imagined for that, but you're the person who's here now." Robert extended his hand and Sarah shook it. It was a firm handshake, sealing a pact that neither of them fully understood, but that both recognized as necessary. 30 days, repeated Robert. 30 days, confirmed Sarah. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting golden rays on the rain-soaked vineyards. And for the first time in 25 years, Robert Blackwood felt that perhaps there was still time for something that truly mattered. The first day of the pact began with a palpable strangeness in the air. Sarah woke before dawn, as always, but this time remained in bed for a few extra minutes, looking at the ceiling of the small room she occupied on the 3rd floor of the mansion. What had she done the previous afternoon? What kind of madness had possessed her to propose an intimate coexistence with a man she barely knew? But when she got up and started to dress, she found something different in her movements. A lightness she hadn't felt in years, as if she had gotten rid of a weight she had been carrying without realizing it. For the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. She didn't know if it was something good or dangerous, but it was real. Robert, for his part, had spent the night awake, not from insomnia or pain, but from a strange agitation that made his heart beat in an uneven rhythm. He had stayed on the balcony until late hours, smoking cigarettes he shouldn't smoke, and thinking about the way Sarah had said people, not employer and employee, but people. When was the last time someone had seen him as a person, simply? They met in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. Mrs. Martha hadn't arrived yet, and the house breathed that particular silence of autumn mornings in the valley. Sarah was preparing coffee, moving around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who had already memorized where everything was kept. She wore a dark green dress that enhanced the golden tone of her skin, and there was something different in her posture, less cautious, more present. "Good morning," said Robert, and his own voice sounded strange to him. There was nothing formal in that greeting. It was genuine, almost intimate. "Good morning," replied Sarah, offering him a cup of coffee. Their fingers touched briefly during the exchange, and both pretended not to notice the small spark that jumped between them. "How did you sleep?" he asked, and it was a question he had never asked any employee in his entire life. "Badly," replied Sarah with surprising honesty. "And you?" "Badly too. And I think we can stop with the sir, don't you think? If we're going to be people for the next 30 days, my name is Robert." Sarah smiled, a small smile, but real. "Robert," she repeated, as if testing the taste of the name in her mouth. "It's strange. The name. No. Treating you as equal." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Equals. As if the differences in class, age, power, and circumstance could be suspended by a mutual agreement of honesty. "Would you like to have coffee on the porch?" asked Robert. "The sunrise over the vineyards is one of the few things that still make me feel it's worth waking up early." Sarah nodded, and they walked together through the silent house. The living room porch faced the east side of the property, where the vineyards extended in perfectly organized rows until they were lost in the morning mist. The golden leaves caught the first rays of sunlight, creating a spectacle of lights that seemed hand-painted. They sat in wicker chairs separated by a small wrought-iron table. The coffee steamed in the cups, and the silence between them was comfortable. There was no rush to fill it with unnecessary words. "Did you always want to work in family homes?" asked Robert after a few minutes. Sarah laughed softly. "That's a strange question. It's like asking if someone always wanted to be an orphan. I'm sorry. I don't know much about what it's like not to have choices." "Don't apologize. It's a real difference between us." Sarah took a sip of coffee, thoughtful. "The sisters taught me that dignified work is God's blessing, but I always knew it was a euphemism for you need to learn to serve because there's no other place for you in the world." There was a discreet bitterness in these words, but not resentment. Sarah spoke of her condition like someone describing the weather, something that cannot be changed, only accepted and worked with. "And you? Did you always want to be a winery owner?" She returned the question. Robert smiled ironically. I always wanted to be anything but a winery owner. As a child, I dreamed of being a pilot. As a teenager, I wanted to study literature in Paris. At 20, I still thought I could escape. What happened? My father died. And suddenly I was responsible for 300 jobs, generations of family tradition, international contracts. Escaping would mean destroying everything my family had built. Do you regret it? The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked if he regretted taking over the family business. It was a given, like eye color or height. I regret not having tried to find a way to reconcile the two things, he said finally. Responsibility and dreams. I thought they were mutually exclusive. And now? Now it doesn't matter anymore. Sarah observed him for a long moment. Yes, it does. Just because you're dying doesn't mean your entire life ceases to have meaning. The frankness with which she said dying hit him like a punch. Most people danced around the word, using euphemisms and half-truths, but Sarah pronounced it with the same naturalness with which she would talk about the weather. Aren't you afraid of death? He asked. I'm afraid of life, replied Sarah without hesitation. Death is just the end of the story, but a wasted life, that's a tragedy that repeats itself every day. They finished their coffee in silence, watching the sun slowly rise and burn off the mist from the vineyards. When Mrs. Martha arrived at 7:30, she found them still on the porch, sitting in comfortable silence like two old friends. Good morning, Mr. Robert, said Mrs. Martha, clearly surprised to find him awake and dressed so early. Has Miss Sarah already served coffee? Yes, Mrs. Martha, and you can relax. Today Sarah will take care of breakfast, said Robert, standing up. Oh, and I need to let you know something. For the next 30 days, Sarah will no longer be an employee of the house. She will be a guest. Mrs. Martha widened her eyes but had the wisdom not to ask questions. In 15 years working for Robert, she had learned that he had his eccentricities, and the best policy was to accept without questioning. Yes, Mr. Robert, as you wish. And Mrs. Martha, can you prepare the blue room on the second floor? I think Sarah will be more comfortable there. The blue room was one of the main guest rooms with a view of the gardens and a private suite. Sarah looked at Robert with surprise, but he avoided her gaze. It's not necessary, said Sarah. The room where I am is perfectly adequate. A guest doesn't sleep in an employee's room, replied Robert firmly. It's part of the agreement. On that first day, they established a routine that would be maintained for the next 30 days. Breakfast together on the porch, then Robert took care of some business in the office while Sarah read in the library. They had lunch together, always in initial silence that gradually transformed into conversation. In the afternoon, they walked through the vineyards, and Robert told stories about the family, the property, the wines. They dined in the formal dining room, but with an intimacy that transformed the solemn environment into something welcoming. On the third day, Sarah asked about Elizabeth. They were walking between the rows of grapes when she stopped in front of a small stone bench that had been placed on an elevation overlooking the entire property. Did she like to sit here? Asked Sarah, running her hand over the smooth stone. Robert stopped beside her, surprised. How do you know this bench has to do with Elizabeth? There are fresh flowers here every week. Someone tends to this place with special care. And the view was it's exactly the kind of place where a woman would sit to think. Robert sat on the bench, inviting Sarah to do the same. She came here every afternoon, especially when she was pregnant with Thomas. She said it was the place where she could see our whole life at once, the house, the vineyards, the mountains in the distance. Were you happy? We were young, replied Robert. At the time I thought it was the same thing. And it wasn't? Robert reflected for a long moment, observing the golden leaves dancing in the breeze. Elizabeth was perfect, beautiful, educated, came from a traditional family, knew exactly how to be a Blackwood's wife. Our marriage was a fairy tale that everyone expected to be written. But maybe it was more of a fairy tale for others than for ourselves. We loved each other, yes, but it was a safe love, predictable. We never questioned ourselves very deeply, never really fought, never showed ourselves completely naked to each other. Sarah absorbed these words in silence. And do you regret that? I regret not having tried to know her better before it was too late. I regret having thought that having a beautiful life was the same as having a true life. And what would a true life be like? Robert looked at Sarah. and there was something in his eyes that made her feel a chill down her spine. "I think I'm beginning to find out." On the 5th day, Sarah brought her diary. It was a small notebook of brown leather worn by time and handling. She placed it on the table between them during breakfast, as if it were a dangerous object that needed to be handled with care. "You talked about stories told without masks," she said. "These are my stories, the ones I've never told to anyone." Robert looked at the notebook as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that if we're going to do this, we need to do it right." She opened the diary to a page marked with a folded paper and began to read in a low but firm voice. "Today I dreamed again of John. In the dream, he wasn't a seminarian, and I wasn't just a girl who cleaned the convent. We were normal people, walking hand in hand on a beach I've never seen in real life. When I woke up, I cried for an hour. Not for losing him, but for the realization that I may never have a life where simple dreams like this are possible." Her voice didn't falter, but Robert could see the emotional cost of that exposure. The words carried an old pain, carefully kept and rarely revisited. "How old were you?" he asked gently. 17. John was 22, in his last year at the seminary. He came to the convent every week to help with the orphaned children. He was kind to me, treated me as if I were important. "And what happened?" Sarah flipped through a few pages of the diary, finding another entry. "John kissed me today behind the chapel. It was my first kiss and probably will be my last. He said he's questioning his vocation, that maybe God has other plans for him. But I know this isn't going to work out. Men like him don't choose girls like me when they can choose sanctity." "And you were right?" 2 weeks later, he sought me out to say goodbye. He had decided to continue at the seminary. He said I had been a temptation sent by God to test his faith, and that passing the test had confirmed his vocation. The bitterness in these words was palpable, but there was something more, a deep sadness that went beyond romantic rejection. "And then?" Sarah hesitated, looking at the diary as if debating whether she should continue. "Then I discovered I was pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Robert felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. The image of Sarah, young, orphaned, alone, carrying a child of a man who had rejected her in God's name, was almost unbearable. "What did you do?" "What could I do?" "I sought out the Mother Superior, confessed everything. I expected to be expelled from the convent, sent to the streets, but she was kind, said she would take care of everything, that she would send me to a house of the sisters in the countryside, where I could have the baby away from curious eyes." "And John, did he know?" "I never told him. What difference would it make? He had made his choice." Sarah flipped through a few more pages, stopping at an entry that was written in a shaky hand. "I lost the baby yesterday. The sisters say it was God's will, that he didn't want me to carry the weight of a sin for the rest of my life. But I felt something die inside me along with him. It wasn't just the baby I lost. It was the ability to believe that I deserved to be loved." Robert reached across the table and covered Sarah's hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond to the touch either. She was lost in the memory of those dark days. "Sarah?" "No," she said, raising her eyes to look at him. "You don't need to say anything. I'm not telling this to gain your pity. I'm telling it because you need to understand who I am, why I accept working in others' houses, why I never married, why you accepted my proposal," completed Robert. "Exactly, because maybe you're the first person who sees me as someone capable of choosing, instead of someone who just accepts what is offered to her." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, mixing with images he tried not to visualize. A frightened teenager discovering she was pregnant, a young seminarian fleeing from his responsibility in the name of religious vocation, a child who never came to be born. He got up from his bed and went to the office. In the lower drawer of the desk, he kept something he hadn't looked at in years: his own letters. Letters he had written but never sent over the decades. To Elizabeth, to Thomas, to himself. He picked one of them randomly. It was dated 3 years after the death of his wife and son. "Elizabeth, today would have been your 32nd birthday. Thomas would be 15. Sometimes I imagine what our life would be like now. He would be in high school, probably interested in cars and girls. You would be complaining that he grew up too fast, that it seems like yesterday we were carrying him in our arms. I would be pretending that I don't care that he prefers to talk to you about important things. Our life would be normal, ordinary, full of small daily dramas that would seem enormous at the time, but, seen from a distance, were just the texture of happiness. Instead, I live in a house that's too big, surrounded by employees who treat me with respect and fear, building an empire that has no heirs to inherit it, nor purpose beyond continuing to exist. Sometimes I think I died in that accident along with you, but forgot to stop breathing. Robert carefully folded the letter and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow he would show his letters to Sarah, as she had shown her diary to him. It was fair, it was necessary, it was frightening. On the 6th day it rained, a dense, persistent rain that transformed the vineyards into a blurred watercolor and forced Robert and Sarah to remain inside the house. They spent the morning in the library, reading in silence, but it was a silence charged with tension. There was something in the air that they couldn't name, a proximity that grew each day, a mutual awareness that was becoming harder to ignore. During lunch, Robert brought his letters. "It's my turn," he said, placing a wooden box on the table. 30 years of letters I never sent. To Elizabeth, to Thomas, to people I never met, to versions of myself I never had the courage to be. Sarah looked at the box with the same reverence with which one looks at a sacred object. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that, if I don't do this now, I'll never have another opportunity." He opened the box and randomly removed a letter. It was recent, written just 2 months earlier. "Thomas, if you were alive today, you would be 37 years old. You would probably be married, maybe have children. I would be a grandfather, and you would be gradually taking over the family business, as I took over when my father died. But sometimes I wonder if you would choose a different path. If you would have the courage, I didn't have to follow your own dreams. I remember that at 10 you wanted to be an archaeologist. You would spend hours excavating in the garden, looking for ancient treasures. Your mother complained about the dirt, but I loved seeing your excitement when you found an old coin or a piece of broken pottery. You saw magic where others saw trash. Maybe that's the difference between generations. You see possibilities where we see only obligations." Robert's voice caught slightly while reading the last lines. Sarah observed his face, seeing the raw vulnerability he tried to hide behind the upright posture. "You blame yourself for their deaths," she said. It wasn't a question. "Of course I blame myself. If I had gone along on the trip, maybe I would have been driving. Maybe we would have left later, arrived at the accident site a few minutes later. Maybe you would have died along with them." The observation made him stop. "Sometimes I think that would have been better." "Why?" "Because then I wouldn't have spent 25 years learning that I don't know how to live alone." Sarah got up and walked to the window, watching the rain trickling down the glass in small rivers. "You know what the difference is between us," she said without turning around. "What?" "You had love and lost it." "I never had love, so I have nothing to lose." "And that's better or worse?" Sarah turned to face him. "I don't know. But I know that this makes me able to recognize true love when I see it, because I don't have confused memories to get in my way." There was something in the way she said these words that made Robert's heart speed up. "And do you see true love here?" Sarah took a few steps toward him, stopping at a distance that was both safe and dangerous. "I see the possibility of true love, and that's already more than I thought would be possible." Robert stood up, and suddenly they were very close. He could smell the discreet perfume Sarah wore, could see the small freckles that dotted her cheeks, could hear her slightly breathless breathing. "Sarah." "No," she said, placing her hand on his chest to keep him at a distance. "Not yet. We have time." But even saying this, she didn't remove her hand. They stayed like this for a long moment, with her palm resting on his chest, feeling his heart beating at an accelerated rhythm that mirrored her own. "How much time is left?" asked Robert, and his voice came out hoarse. 24 days, replied Sarah, and there was a promise in these words that made something contract in his lower abdomen. She removed her hand and returned to her chair, but the air between them remained charged with a tension that neither knew how to alleviate. On the 10th day, Robert had a crisis. He woke in the middle of the night with excruciating pains in his abdomen, uncontrollable vomiting, and a weakness that left him unable to get out of bed. Sarah found him at 5 in the morning, when she went to knock on his door for breakfast and got no response. "Robert," she called, knocking again. "Are you all right?" A low moan was the only response. Sarah opened the door without hesitation and found him curled up in bed, as pale as the bedding, sweating cold. "My God," she murmured, running to the side of the bed. "I'll call a doctor." "No," said Robert in a weak voice, holding her wrist. "I don't want doctors, just stay with me." Sarah hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to seek medical help and the desire to respect his will. In the end, Robert's desperate look convinced her. "At least let me give you something for the pain," she said. She brought the medications that Robert took for the cancer, helped him swallow them, and stayed by the bedside until the medication took effect and he was able to relax. During all this time, she held his hand, whispering words of comfort that seemed to come from some maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed. "I'm afraid," admitted Robert when the pain finally subsided. "Of what?" "Of dying before the 30 days are over." Sarah squeezed his hand more tightly. "Then don't die." It was an absurd, childish response, but there was so much determination in her voice that Robert almost believed she had power over life and death. "And if I die?" "Then I will miss you every day for the rest of my life," said Sarah, and there were tears in her eyes. "But at least I'll know that you died knowing you were loved." It was the first time the word love was pronounced between them explicitly. It hung in the air like a confession, a promise, a threat. "Do you love me?" asked Robert, and his voice was that of a frightened child. "I'm learning to love you," replied Sarah. "And you?" "I already love you," said Robert without hesitation. "And that terrifies me more than death." Sarah leaned over and kissed his forehead, a chaste and tender kiss that contained more intimacy than any physical contact Robert had experienced in decades. "Rest," she whispered. "We still have time." Robert fell asleep with Sarah's hand in his, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he didn't dream of death. He dreamed of life, of possibilities, of the 20 days that still remained to discover how far this improbable love could take them. When he woke up, it was already late at night. Sarah had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, one hand still intertwined with his. She seemed smaller while sleeping, younger, more vulnerable. Robert observed her for a long time, memorizing every detail of her relaxed face, every soft breath, and at that moment, for the first time in 25 years, Robert Blackwood allowed himself to believe that perhaps there was still time to be happy. The confession of love had changed everything and nothing at the same time. In the days following Robert's crisis, Sarah and he navigated through completely new emotional territory, where each look carried weight and each accidental touch sent waves of electricity between them. They still maintained the apparent formality of the original agreement, but now there was an undercurrent of intimacy that made each moment loaded with meaning. On the 12th day, Sarah found Robert in the office at 6 in the morning, already dressed and working. He had recovered his physical strength, but there was something different in his movements, a contained urgency, as if he were trying to solve all the world's problems before time ran out. "You're working too hard," she said, entering the office with a tray of coffee. "I'm trying to put things in order," replied Robert, without raising his eyes from the documents. "There are issues that need to be resolved before it's no longer possible." Sarah placed the tray on the side table and approached him. "What kind of issues?" Robert hesitated, nervously fidgeting with a gold pen that had been his father's. "The will, mainly, and some decisions about the future of the winery. Can I help with anything?" He finally raised his eyes to look at her. "Actually, you can. There's something I need to tell you, and I don't know what your reaction will be." The tone of his voice alerted Sarah. She sat in the chair in front of the desk, preparing for any revelation that might come. "2 weeks ago, even before you arrived here, I made some changes to my will," began Robert. "At first, they were just simple adjustments, donations to charities, some provisions for the old employees. But after you arrived—" He stopped, as if the words were too difficult to pronounce. "After I arrived, what?" insisted Sarah. "After you arrived, I realized I didn't want everything I built here to simply disperse among distant relatives who never cared about this place. So I included a specific clause about you." Sarah felt her stomach contract. "What kind of clause?" "You appear in the will as effective curator of the winery, with the right to permanent residence in the house, a monthly amount for maintenance and participation in decisions about the future of the property." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Robert, that's crazy," she said finally. She said, "We've barely known each other for 2 weeks." "Time enough to know that you understand this place in a way that no one else understands," he replied. "Time enough to know that you see beauty where others see only business." "But your family, they will never accept this." Robert laughed bitterly. "My family consists of a sister who lives in New York and only remembers me when she needs money, and some cousins who show up here once a year for the end-of-year holidays. They have no real connection to this place." Sarah stood up and began to walk around the office, clearly agitated. "This is going to look like that you approached me out of interest," completed Robert. "I know, and if that bothers you, I can change the will again." "That's not what bothers me," said Sarah, stopping in front of the window. "What bothers me is the feeling that you're trying to keep me here even after you die." The brutal honesty of the observation hit Robert like a punch. He got up and walked to her, stopping right behind her without touching her. "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "Maybe I'm trying to ensure that part of me continues here through you. But it's also true that I can't bear the idea that, after I die, you'll go back to working in others' houses, to being treated as invisible, to living a life that doesn't recognize your value." Sarah turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "And if I don't want that life? And if I want to choose my own path? Then you'll be free to refuse the inheritance and follow your path," said Robert. "But at least you'll know that someone believed you deserved to choose." They stayed like this for a long moment, looking at each other through unshed tears and unmade promises. Finally, Sarah extended her hand and touched his face, a soft, almost maternal touch. "Do you love me or want to possess me?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't know the difference anymore," replied Robert, leaning his face into the palm of her hand. "The difference is that love liberates, possession imprisons." "Then teach me the difference," he whispered. Sarah leaned in and kissed his lips, a soft, questioning kiss that lasted only a few seconds, but seemed to contain years of loneliness. When they separated, both were breathing irregularly. 18 days, murmured Sarah. 18 days, agreed Robert. That afternoon they received an unexpected visit. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the sound of a car climbing the cobblestone road. Through the window, she saw a black Mercedes stop in front of the main entrance, and an elegant woman of approximately 50 years got out of the passenger seat. Even without ever having seen the person, Sarah immediately knew who it was. There was an unmistakable similarity in the aristocratic features, the upright posture, the authoritarian way she gestured to the driver. Jessica Blackwood Davis had arrived. Sarah called Mrs. Martha and asked her to inform Robert about the visit, while she herself discreetly withdrew to the second floor. She didn't want to create an awkward situation right at the first meeting with his sister. From the blue room, she could hear voices coming from downstairs. First Robert's surprised exclamation, then Jessica's high-pitched and slightly hysterical tone. Although she couldn't discern specific words, the tone of the conversation was clearly not friendly. An hour later, Robert knocked on her door. "Sarah, can we talk?" She opened the door and saw that he was pale, with a tense expression he hadn't shown since the health crisis a few days before. "Your sister found out about the will." It wasn't a question. "My lawyer thought it prudent to inform her about the changes. Family protocol," he said, "and she's furious." Furious is an understatement. "She wants to meet you." Sarah felt her stomach freeze. Now? Now. And Sarah, she's not an easy person. Jessica has always been protective of the family's reputation, sometimes to the point of paranoia. "What do you want me to do?" "Be yourself. But maybe it's better not to mention the details of our agreement." Sarah nodded, smoothed the navy blue dress she was wearing, and followed Robert to the living room. Jessica was sitting in a leather armchair, holding a teacup as if it were a weapon. She was a beautiful woman, well preserved, with impeccable blonde hair and discreet but expensive jewelry. Her eyes, the same grey colour as Robert's, examined Sarah from head to toe with the precision of a scanner. "Jessica, this is Sarah Miller," said Robert. "Sarah, my sister." "Jessica." "Miss Miller," said Jessica without getting up. Her voice was polite, but cold as ice. "My brother told me that you have been a very pleasant companion for him in these difficult times." "Mrs. Davis," replied Sarah, keeping the respectful tone. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Please sit down," said Jessica, gesturing to a chair. "I'd like to get to know you better." Sarah sat down, keeping her back straight and her hands carefully positioned in her lap. She felt like a criminal being interrogated. "My brother told me that you worked as a housekeeper for several families," began Jessica. "You must have interesting experience with different types of people." "Yes, ma'am. I've always tried to be discreet and efficient in my work. I imagine, and I'm told that you were raised in a convent, you must have a very peculiar education." There was poison in that word, peculiar, as if religious education were some kind of moral defect. "The sisters taught me the value of honest work and respect for others," replied Sarah, keeping her voice firm. "How admirable," said Jessica, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And it seems to me that you've made a very strong impression on my brother. Very quick, I must say." "Jessica," warned Robert, but she silenced him with a look. "It's natural for me to worry, Robert. You're in a very vulnerable condition, and sometimes opportunistic. People can take advantage of that vulnerability." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt the blood rise to her cheeks, but forced herself to maintain her composure. "I understand your concern," she said. "If I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same." The diplomatic response clearly irritated Jessica, who expected a defensive reaction that would justify her hostility. "How good that you understand," she said. "Then you'll certainly also understand why I consider it inappropriate, the inclusion of a practically stranger in such intimate family matters." "Enough, Jessica," said Robert, with a firmness that surprised both women. "Sarah is not a stranger to me, and I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Even when those decisions involve leaving part of the family's heritage to someone you've known for 2 weeks. "Especially then," replied Robert, "because Sarah is the only person I know who isn't interested in my money." Jessica let out a sarcastic laugh. "How can you be so sure?" It was Sarah who replied, slowly rising from the chair. "Because if I were interested in his money, Mrs. Davis, I would have accepted his proposal on the first night." The silence that followed was deadly. Jessica widened her eyes, clearly shocked by the frankness of the response. Robert looked at Sarah with a mixture of admiration and horror. "What proposal?" asked Jessica with an icy voice. Sarah looked at Robert, silently asking permission to continue. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your brother asked me to spend a night with him," said Sarah, looking at Jessica directly. "I refused. Instead, I offered my presence, my companionship, my friendship. Not for money, not for inheritance, but because I recognized in him something that I myself carry. The loneliness of someone who has forgotten how to connect with other human beings." Jessica was speechless. Robert had stood up and walked to the window, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "You're telling me," said Jessica slowly, "that my brother made you an indecent proposal and you refused it? I'm telling you that your brother made me a desperate request, and I offered something better. And what would that be?" Sarah looked at Robert, who still had his back to them, observing the vineyards through the window. Her chance for him to remember what it's like to be alive before he dies. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Jessica looked from Sarah to Robert, trying to process what she had just heard. "And the inheritance?" she asked finally. "The inheritance is his problem," said Sarah. "I never asked for anything, never expected anything, and if he changes his mind tomorrow, I'll still be here for as long as he wants my company." "Why?" For the first time since the conversation began, Sarah smiled, a small smile but genuine. "Because after 26 years believing that I didn't deserve to be loved, I discovered I was wrong. And that's worth more than any inheritance." Jessica remained silent for a long moment, studying Sarah with an expression that had transformed from hostility to cautious curiosity. "Do you really love him?" she asked finally. "I'm learning to love him," replied Sarah. "And he's teaching me that I am worthy of being loved." Robert turned from the window, and Sarah saw that there were tears in his eyes. Jessica slowly stood up, smoothing the skirt of her expensive dress. "Well," she said, and her voice had lost its cutting edge, "that is unexpected." She walked up to Sarah and studied her for a moment. "You know he's going to die, don't you?" "Yes." "And you know that even with the inheritance, there will always be people who will question your motives?" "Yes." "And still, you want to stay?" Sarah looked at Robert, who was watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I want to stay for the days that remain," she said. "As for the future, I've already learned not to make very distant plans." Jessica nodded slowly. "Then perhaps," she said, "perhaps I misjudged the situation." She walked to Robert and touched his arm. "It's been a long time since I've seen you happy," she said quietly. "And you are happy, aren't you?" "I am," replied Robert. "For the first time in 25 years, I'm happy." Jessica nodded again and addressed Sarah. "I apologize for the interrogation, but you must understand that Robert is all I have left of real family." "I understand perfectly," said Sarah. "And don't apologize. If I were you, I would have asked the same questions." Jessica extended her hand and Sarah shook it. It was a gesture of truce, if not friendship. "Well," said Jessica, "I think I'll spend the night at the inn in town and return to New York tomorrow. But before I go, there's something I need to tell you." She looked at Robert with a strange expression, part embarrassment, part relief. "What is it?" asked Robert. "The reason I came here so quickly wasn't just because of the will," she said. "Actually, I received a letter from someone who knows Sarah." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "A letter? From a Sister Beatrice, from St. Mary's Convent in Sonoma. She wrote to me 2 weeks ago, saying she had heard that a young woman she knew was working here." The name of Sister Beatrice made Sarah stagger. Robert took a step forward, ready to support her if necessary. "What did Sister Beatrice say?" asked Sarah with a weak voice. Jessica took a letter from her purse pocket. "She said you were special, that you had a gift for healing without touching, for bringing peace where there was hopelessness. She said that if anyone could help my brother in these last months, it would be you." Sarah was astonished. "She wrote that 2 weeks ago." "Yes. Even before you arrived here." Robert looked from one woman to the other, trying to understand the implications of what he was hearing. "Do you know this Sister Beatrice?" he asked Sarah. She was the one who took care of me when I was a child," said Sarah slowly. She was older than the other sisters, had been a nursemaid before entering the convent. "She always said she had a premonition about me, that I was destined for something special." "And she knew you would come to work here?" asked Jessica. "Impossible. I didn't even know I would come to work here until Mrs. Martha invited me." Jessica and Robert exchanged glances. There was something in this coincidence that went beyond chance. "May I see the letter?" asked Sarah. Jessica handed her the paper, and Sarah read in silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she went through the lines written in the careful handwriting she remembered so well. "What does she say?" asked Robert. Sarah read aloud. "There is a young woman who works in San Francisco, a girl we raised in the convent. She has eyes of ancient loss and a way of healing without touching. If your brother is suffering as I believe he is, she may be the answer to prayers he doesn't even know he's making. Her name is Sarah Miller, and she carries within herself the capacity to transform absence into presence, pain into gratitude. When you meet her, you'll know I'm right." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah carefully folded the letter and returned it to Jessica. "How did she know?" asked Robert. "Sister Beatrice always said that God spoke to her through dreams," said Sarah. "The other sisters thought she was just an eccentric old woman, but I always believed her." "And you think it was destiny?" asked Jessica, clearly skeptical but also intrigued. Sarah looked at Robert, who was watching her with an expression of amazement and something that seemed to be reverence. "I don't know if it was destiny," she said, "but I know that, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I should be." Jessica stayed for another hour, during which the atmosphere among the three completely transformed. The initial hostility gave way to cautious curiosity, and then to something that seemed to be the beginning of a grudging acceptance. When she finally said goodbye, she hugged both Robert and Sarah. "Take care of each other," she said. "And Robert, if you're happy, then I'm happy." After she left, Robert and Sarah stood on the porch, watching the car lights disappear around the bend in the road. "Do you believe in destiny?" asked Robert. "Today I do," replied Sarah. They sat side by side on the porch swing, something they had never done before. The physical proximity was comforting and disturbing at the same time. 17 days, said Sarah. 17 days, confirmed Robert. Are you afraid? Not of death, he said. I'm afraid that 17 days won't be enough for all the things I want to tell you. Sarah turned to face him. Then start now. Robert took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing each finger with a reverence that made Sarah tremble. "I want to say that you saved me," he said. "Not from death, but from the feeling that my life had been wasted. I want to say that in the last 15 days, I felt more alive than in the last 25 years. I want to say that you taught me that love isn't possession, but gratitude. And what else? I want to say that I'm in love with your courage, with your wisdom, with your ability to find beauty in dark places. I want to say that you have the saddest and most beautiful smile I've ever seen. I want to say that if I had to choose how to spend my last days on earth, I would choose exactly this, sitting by your side, hearing your breathing, feeling the warmth of your hand in mine." Sarah was crying silently, tears that ran down her cheeks without sobs. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want to tell me?" "I want to say that you gave me something I never thought I would have, the feeling of being important to someone. I want to say that you look at me as if I were a miracle, and that makes me feel like maybe I really am. I want to say that I've learned more about love in the last 15 days than in my entire previous life." They remained silent for a long time, swinging gently, observing the stars that were beginning to appear in the dark sky. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "When the 30th day comes, will you choose to stay with me?" Sarah turned to face him, and there was a new determination in her eyes. "I've already chosen," she said. "I chose the moment you told me you loved me. I chose when your sister asked me if I really loved you. I chose every time you looked at me as if I were the answer to a question you didn't even know you were asking." Robert pulled her closer, and she leaned against his shoulder. They could feel each other's hearts beating, two rhythms that gradually synchronized. "I won't be able to wait another 17 days, murmured Robert against her hair. "You will," said Sarah, "because we have all the time in the world." 3 months isn't all the time in the world." "No," agreed Sarah, "but it's all the time we need for a lifetime of love." And there, under the stars of Napa Valley, gently swinging on the porch of a century-old house, two lonely souls finally found what they had been looking for all their lives, even without knowing they were looking. The days following Jessica's visit brought a new and dangerous intimacy. As if the external validation of their love had removed the last barriers of caution, Robert and Sarah began to move around each other with a naturalness that bordered on magnetic. They were no longer two people trying to discover if it was safe to get closer. They were two halves of something that was becoming inevitably whole. On the 16th day, Sarah woke before dawn with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't anxiety or fear, but a kind of soft urgency, as if something important was about to happen. She dressed quickly and went down to the kitchen, where she found Robert already preparing coffee. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "I slept little," he admitted. "I keep thinking we're wasting time sleeping." Sarah smiled and approached him by the stove. It was the first time they had been so close in the kitchen, and there was something domestic and intimate about this proximity that made her heart race. "What do you want to do today?" she asked, and there was something in the way she said "you" that made him realize she was really asking about his desires, his dreams, his deepest wishes. "I want to show you something," said Robert, "something I've never shown to anyone." After breakfast, he took her to a part of the property she hadn't yet seen. It was necessary to walk along a steep trail that wound through the oldest vineyards, where the vines were so old that their trunks resembled sculptures twisted by time. "My great-grandfather planted these grapes in 1897, explained Robert as they walked. "He said he chose this specific location because the land here wept sweetly. It had a unique mineral composition that gave a special flavor to the wines." They climbed for almost an hour until they reached a small hidden plateau protected by natural rocks and surrounded by the oldest vines on the property. In the center of this space, there was a stone structure that looked like a small chapel without a roof. "What is this place?" asked Sarah, walking around the structure with reverence. "My great-grandfather built this as an altar to give thanks for the first successful harvest," explained Robert. "But after my grandfather took over the property, the place was forgotten. No one else comes up here anymore." "Except you." "Except me. I've been coming here since I was a child. It's where I feel closest to, I don't know how to explain it, to something bigger than myself." Sarah sat on one of the stones that formed a circle around the altar. The view from there was breathtaking. You could see the entire extent of the property, the mountains in the distance, and the morning mist still rising from the valleys. "Is this where you come to think about death?" she asked. "This is where I come to think about life," corrected Robert, sitting beside her. "Death is everywhere, but life needs to be sought in specific places." They remained silent for a few minutes, absorbing the peace of the place. Sarah extended her hand and touched one of the altar stones, feeling the rough texture under her fingers. "There's something I want to tell you," said Robert, "about Elizabeth." Sarah turned to face him, preparing for any revelation that might come. "I lied when I said I loved her," he continued. "Or rather, I told a half-truth. I loved the idea of her. I loved how our life seemed perfect viewed from the outside. I loved the son we had together. But Elizabeth, the real person behind the perfect wife, I never really knew her. Why? Because I never asked who she really was. I never questioned if she was happy, if she had dreams of her own, if there were things she wanted to do besides being Mrs. Blackwood. I simply assumed she was satisfied with the role that society expected her to play." Sarah processed these words in silence. "And you think she wasn't satisfied?" "I found some of her diaries after the accident," said Robert. "She wrote about feeling invisible, about having lost her identity in the marriage, about wondering who she would be if she weren't my wife and Thomas's mother." "And that affected you?" "It devastated me. I realized I had lived for 15 years with a woman I loved, but whom I had never really seen. And the worst part is that she died without knowing that I could have loved her for who she really was, if I had had the courage to ask." Sarah extended her hand and touched his. "Is that why you're so afraid of possessing me instead of loving me?" "Exactly. With you, I want to do it differently. I want to know every thought, every fear, every dream. I want to love you completely, not just the version of you that fits into my life. And if you discover things about me that you don't like," Robert turned to face her fully, "then I'll love those things too, because they're part of who you are." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "No one has ever said something like that to me before." "Then let me say more," said Robert, taking both her hands. "Let me say that I love the way you bite your lower lip when you're thinking. I love how you arrange flowers so that each one has its moment to shine. I love how you listen, not just with your ears but with your whole body as if you were absorbing every word. I love your intelligence, which is quiet but sharp. I love your sadness because it taught you compassion. I love your strength, which is made of scars that transformed into wisdom." Sarah was crying now, silent tears that ran down her cheeks. "And I love you," she said, "for seeing me as someone worthy of being loved like this, for making me feel as if I were a miracle instead of an accident." Robert leaned in and kissed her tears, then her lips. It was a different kiss from the previous ones, deeper, more urgent, loaded with promises and possibilities. When they separated, both were breathing irregularly. 14 days, murmured Sarah. 14 days, confirmed Robert. "And if I asked to shorten the deadline?" Sarah smiled through the tears. "I would say that some things are worth waiting for. And if I said I don't know if I have 14 days? The question made Sarah stop breathing for a moment. "What do you mean?" Robert hesitated, looking at the mountains in the distance. "I had a conversation with the doctor yesterday. Things are progressing more quickly than we expected." "How much time?" "Maybe a few weeks, maybe less." Sarah got up abruptly and walked to the edge of the plateau, where she could see the entire extent of the vineyards. Robert followed her, stopping right behind her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Not of you dying," she said without turning around. "That I always knew. I'm afraid of not having enough time to love you right." "What would loving right be?" Sarah turned to face him. "It would be having years to discover how you like your coffee in the morning, how you are when you have a cold, how you react when you're worried about business. It would be arguing with you about silly things and then making up. It would be seeing you grow old, seeing what you would be like as a grandfather. It would be—" She stopped, unable to continue. Robert pulled her into his arms, and she allowed herself to cry against his chest. "Then love me all at once," he said. "Love me with all the intensity you would use in 50 years, concentrated in a few weeks. Is that possible?" "With you, I think anything is possible." They returned home in silence, but it was a silence charged with new urgency. The news about the progression of the disease had changed something fundamental between them. There was no longer the luxury of taking things slowly. That afternoon, Sarah did something she had never done before. She took complete control of the house. She dismissed Mrs. Martha early, sent the other employees home, and for the first time since she arrived, she and Robert were completely alone in the mansion. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want you to tell me about all the places you've lived," said Robert. "I want to know what your life was like before me." They sat in the living room with a bottle of red wine between them, and Sarah began to talk. She told him about the convent, about the other orphaned girls she grew up with, about the first houses where she worked. She spoke about kind employers and cruel employers, about children she took care of who later forgot her name, about small rooms in big houses where she felt invisible. "Have you ever been in love before, besides the seminarian?" asked Robert. "I thought so once," admitted Sarah. "There was a gardener in a house in San Francisco. He was kind to me, brought me small flowers he picked from the garden. For a few months I thought that maybe—" "What happened?" "I discovered he did the same thing with all the maids. The flowers weren't special. I wasn't special. It was just part of a pattern." "And that hurt you?" "It taught me that if you have nothing to offer beyond your own company, you need to make sure that company is worth something." Robert leaned forward. "And now? Do you think your company is worth something?" Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy smile he had seen on her. "Now I know it is. Because you look at me as if I were the treasure you've been searching for your entire life. That's exactly what you are." When night came, neither of them wanted to go to sleep. There was a sense that each moment together was too precious to be wasted on sleep. They moved to the porch, where they nestled together on the swing, wrapped in a blanket. "Sarah?" "Yes? Can I ask you a very personal question?" She laughed softly. "At this point, I think you can ask me anything. Do you still think about the baby you lost?" The question caught her off guard. She was silent for a long moment, considering the answer. "Every day," she said finally. Not with sadness like before, but with curiosity. Who would he have been? What would my life have been like if he had survived? "Would you like to have children?" "I used to think so. Now I don't know if there would be enough time to be the mother a child deserves. Because of my age, because of my past. Children deserve mothers who know how to love without fear, how to provide security without clinging. I'm just learning these things now." Robert kissed the top of her head. "You would be a wonderful mother. How can you know? By the way you take care of me, by the way you see beauty in things others would ignore, by your patience, your kindness, your strength. And you? Would you like to have more children? With you?" "Yes. Even knowing that I wouldn't be here to see them grow up." The response made Sarah shiver. There was something almost sacred in the idea of leaving life behind, of creating something that would continue to exist even after they were gone. "It's a cruel fantasy," she said. "Or maybe it's the only thing that makes sense," replied Robert. "Creating life when you're dying. Planting seeds that you'll never see bloom." They swung in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The night was clear, and the stars seemed particularly bright. "Robert?" "Yes?" "When you die, what do you want to happen to your body?" It was a question he had avoided thinking about, but knew would eventually need to be answered. "I want to be cremated," he said. "And I want my ashes scattered in the vineyards, in the highest part where my great-grandfather's altar is." "Why?" "Because I want to continue being part of this place. I want that, when you walk through the vineyards, you know I'm there in some way." Sarah nestled closer to him. "And if I decide to leave after you die, then I'll take you with me wherever you go." "How?" "In memories. In the love I left in you. In the way I changed your perception of your own worth." Sarah cried silently against his chest. "I don't want you to die. I know. But I promise that when it happens, it will be in peace. Without pain, without fear, without regrets." "How can you promise that?" "Because you've given me something I never thought I would have. The chance to die having lived completely." On the 20th day, something happened that changed everything again. Sarah was in the library, reading an old letter she had found in a desk drawer, when she heard voices coming from the main entrance. They were voices she didn't recognize. It wasn't Mrs. Martha or any of the regular employees. She went down the stairs and found Robert in the living room, talking with an older woman, dressed in the habit of the Sisters of Charity. It was Sister Beatrice. "Sarah, my child," said the nun, standing and opening her arms. "How you've grown." Sarah ran into the arms of the woman who had been her most constant maternal figure, immediately feeling like a child again. "Sister Beatrice, How did you know I was here? I knew you would be, said the nun, stepping back to study Sarah's face. I've been waiting for weeks for you to appear. Waiting where? At the convent. I received a very interesting visit last week. Sarah looked at Robert, confused. He was smiling in a way she had never seen before, a smile that mixed mischief and tenderness. What kind of visit? Asked Sarah. Your young man here, said Sister Beatrice, gesturing to Robert, showed up at the convent asking about you. He wanted to know about your childhood, about your dreams, about the things I thought would make you happy. Sarah turned to Robert, mouth agape. You went to the convent? I did, he admitted. I wanted to better understand who you are, where you came from. And what did she tell you? Sister Beatrice laughed, a cheerful sound that Sarah remembered from her childhood. I told him that you were always special, but that you never knew it. I said that you had a heart too big for your own good, and that you deserved someone who recognized that. And what else? I said that you always drew the same thing when you were a child, continued the nun. Houses, hundreds of drawings of houses. Not big or luxurious houses, but houses with gardens, with porches, with places to sit and observe the world. Houses that seemed like homes. Sarah remembered the drawings. She had spent hours creating imaginary houses, places where she could belong. Why did you bring this up? She asked Robert. Because I want to give you a house, he said. Not just a place to live, but a home. A place that's yours where you can put down roots and feel safe. But you've already done that. No, he interrupted. What I did was include you in my will. What I want to do now is different. He stood and walked to the desk, from which he retrieved an official envelope. I transferred the property of the house and 50 acres of the vineyards to your name, he said. Not as an inheritance, but as a gift. It's yours now while I'm alive, so there are no doubts about your intentions or mine. Sarah looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Robert, I can't accept this. Why not? Because it's too much. Because people will say, let people talk, said Sister Beatrice, interrupting her. My child, you've spent your entire life thinking you didn't deserve anything beyond crumbs. Maybe it's time to learn to accept the whole loaf. Sarah looked from the nun to Robert, then back to the nun. Is this really what you think I should do? I think you should do what your heart commands, said Sister Beatrice. But I also think that God doesn't put dreams in our hearts for us to be afraid of realizing them. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was the deed to the property, with her name in clear letters. Sarah Miller, owner. I don't understand, she said. Why do this now? Why not wait? Because I want to see your happiness, said Robert. I want to spend my last days knowing that you're secure, that you have a place in the world that is truly yours. Sarah sat heavily in an armchair, still looking at the documents. And if I mess everything up? And if I don't know how to manage a property? Then you'll learn, said Sister Beatrice, and you'll have help. Martha told me that the employees already respect you, that they feel you understand this place in a special way. It's true, confirmed Robert. Yesterday, William, who's responsible for the vineyards, told me that you have an eye for the land, that you instinctively know when the grapes are ready, when the vines need special care. Sarah remembered the walks through the vineyards, how she felt a strange connection with those ancient plants, as if she could hear what they needed. And there's one more thing, said Robert, approaching her. Something I discovered when I went to the convent. What? Sister Beatrice told me about a project you always wanted to do when you were a child, a special garden. Sarah looked at the nun, surprised. You remember that? How could I forget? You talked about it constantly. A garden with flowers that would bloom all year round, where sad people could go to find peace. I was 10 years old, said Sarah, embarrassed. It was a childish fantasy. It wasn't fantasy, said Robert. It was vision, and I want to help you realize it. He gestured to the window that overlooked the front gardens of the house. There's a space there that I never knew how to use. It's been empty for years. It could be your garden. Sarah stood and walked to the window. The space that Robert indicated was indeed perfect, protected from the wind, with good sun exposure, yet still private. It would be a therapeutic garden, he explained, a place where people who are going through difficult times could come to find tranquility. It could be part of the property's legacy. Sarah turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. You really listen to me. I listen to every word you say, even the ones that were never spoken. Sister Beatrice approached Sarah and touched her arm. "My child, when God wants to give us something, he often uses other people as instruments. Don't question the miracle, just accept it with gratitude." Sarah looked at the documents in her hands, then at Robert, then at the nun, who had been her anchor for so many years. "All right," she said finally. "I accept." Robert smiled, a smile of pure joy that transformed his entire face. "But with one condition," added Sarah, "which is, I want it to be our garden, our project. I want to create it with you, even if you're not here to see it finished. How would we do that? You help me plan, teach me about the plants that grow well in this region, tell me about the meanings of the flowers we should include, and then I'll make sure it's exactly as we dreamed together." Robert approached and kissed her, a deep kiss, gratitude and love mixing in an intensity that made Sister Beatrice discreetly turn to look out the window. When they separated, Sarah whispered, 10 days. 10 days, confirmed Robert. "And now that I'm the owner of the house, can I change the rules?" Robert laughed. "What rules do you want to change?" Sarah looked at Sister Beatrice, who was smiling as if she knew exactly what she was going to say. "I want you to sleep in my room tonight," said Sarah. Not yet, but so we can fall asleep together, so I can hear your breathing, feel your presence, so that when I wake up in the middle of the night afraid that you've disappeared, I can reach out and touch you." Robert looked at her as if she had just offered him paradise. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I don't want to waste even one night of the next 10 days sleeping alone." Sister Beatrice approached them and placed a hand on the head of each, like a blessing. "May God bless this love," she said, "and may you have the wisdom to love it well." That night, for the first time, Sarah and Robert slept in the same bed. They didn't make love, not yet, but they slept intertwined, synchronized breathing, hearts beating in the same rhythm. And for the first time in 25 years, Robert slept through the night without nightmares, lulled by the presence of the woman who had brought light back into his life. The first rays of sun on the 21st day found Sarah and Robert still intertwined in bed, breathing in the same rhythm, as if they had found a synchrony that went beyond the physical. Sarah woke first, with the strange feeling that something had changed during the night. It wasn't something bad, but definitive, as if one door had closed and another had opened. Robert was paler than normal, and there was a transparency to his skin that frightened her. When he opened his eyes and smiled at her, Sarah saw something new in his gaze, a serenity that wasn't there the night before. "How do you feel?" she asked, gently touching his face. "Like I've come home," he replied, and there was something in the way he said these words that made her heart tighten. They had breakfast in bed, something they had never done before. Sarah had prepared a simple tray, coffee, fruits, fresh bread that Mrs. Martha had left the day before. But there was a domestic intimacy in that moment that surpassed any luxury. "Sarah," said Robert, putting his coffee cup aside, "there's something I want to do today. Something important." "What?" "I want to plant the vineyard." Sarah straightened up in bed, confused. "What vineyard?" Robert got up and walked to the window, observing the vineyards that stretched across the property. "There's a specific type of grape I want to plant, an ancient variety that was lost in this region decades ago. It's called Lacrima Christi." "Tears of Christ," translated Sarah. "What a strange name for a grape. My grandmother used to talk about it. She said it produced a wine that had the taste of longing, sweet and bitter at the same time, like the most precious memories." Robert turned to face her. "I managed to find seedlings at a nursery specializing in extinct varieties. They arrived yesterday. And you want to plant today?" "I want to plant with you. I want it to be our last project together." Sarah felt a chill down her spine. "Why are you talking as if it were a farewell?" Robert returned to the bed and sat beside her, taking her hands. "Because maybe it is. I had another episode during the night, while you were sleeping. Nothing serious, but I felt that something is changing rapidly. Why didn't you wake me?" "Because I wanted you to have one last night of peaceful sleep in my arms." Sarah threw herself against him, hugging him tightly. "Don't talk like that. We still have 9 days." "And we'll enjoy every minute," said Robert, stroking her hair, "starting now. Let's plant our story in the earth." An hour later, they were walking through the vineyards, followed by William, the vineyard manager, who was carrying the Lacrima Christi seedlings in a small cart. Robert had chosen a specific location, a slope that received the morning sun and was protected from the stronger winds. "Why here?" asked Sarah. "Because it's the place you can see from your bedroom window," said Robert. "I want that. When these grapes grow and produce wine, you'll remember today." They spent the entire morning planting. Robert taught Sarah how to prepare the soil, how to position each seedling to give it the best chance of survival, how to create the rudimentary irrigation system. Their hands got dirty with earth, and there was something deeply symbolic in this act, as if they were planting not just grapes, but hopes, dreams, a continuity that transcended mortality. "How long does it take for a vine to produce grapes?" asked Sarah. 3 years for the first grapes, 5 for a really good harvest," replied Robert. "And 10 years for the wine to reach its ideal maturity." 10 years, repeated Sarah, looking at the small seedlings they had just planted. "You'll never see this wine." "But you will," said Robert, tenderly cleaning the earth from her hands. "And when you taste it, you'll remember me." Sarah looked at the row of newly planted seedlings, then at Robert. "And if the wine is terrible?" Robert laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed through the vineyards. "Then you'll know I wasn't perfect, and you'll love me even more for it." That afternoon, while they rested on the porch after the physical work of the morning, Sarah made a decision she had been considering for days. "Robert," she said, "I want to know your complete will." He looked at her surprised. "Why?" "Because I'll be responsible for executing your wishes after you're gone. I want to be sure I understand exactly what you want to happen." Robert hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But there are some things that might surprise you." They went to the office, where Robert removed the official document from a small safe. It was an extensive will with several pages of legal details, but Sarah read each line carefully. "There's a substantial amount for Mrs. Martha and for the other long-time employees," she noted. "They dedicated their lives to this family. They deserve security." Sarah continued reading. "A donation to the convent where I grew up, a scholarship in your name for young orphans, a fund for cancer research." She stopped and looked at him. "You thought of everything. I tried to imagine how I would like to be remembered." Sarah reached the section that referred specifically to her. Besides the house and the 50 acres that had already been transferred, there was an amount of money that left her stunned. "Robert, it's much more than I could use in an entire lifetime. It's for you to have choices," he said, "to never again have to accept a job just because you need money, to be able to do the good you want to do. And if I use the money badly, and if I'm not worthy of this trust?" Robert got up and walked to her, kneeling beside her chair. "Sarah, you're the most ethical person I know. If there's anyone in the world I would trust with this responsibility, it's you." Sarah continued reading until she reached the last section, which made her stop completely. "In case Sarah Miller is pregnant at the time of my death, the child will be considered my legitimate daughter or son and heir to 50% of all my assets." She looked at Robert, incredulous. "Why did you include this?" Robert blushed slightly. Because there's a possibility that in the coming days we might create a life together. And if that happens, I want that child to be protected and recognized." "But Robert, I don't even know if I can have children after the miscarriage." "It doesn't matter. What matters is that if a miracle happens, I want you and the child to have everything you need." Sarah closed the will and placed it on the desk. "Are there any more surprises you haven't told me about?" Robert smiled mysteriously. "One." He opened a different drawer and removed a small blue velvet box. Sarah felt her heart stop. "Robert, it's not what you're thinking," he said quickly. "Or rather it is and it isn't." He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a small but perfectly cut stone. It wasn't a traditional engagement ring, it was more singular, almost artistic. "It belonged to my great-grandmother," explained Robert, "the only piece of jewelry in the family that wasn't made to impress others, but because it had personal meaning. The stone is a garnet extracted right here in the mountains of the property." Sarah touched the ring with reverence. "It's beautiful. I want you to wear it, not as a symbol of engagement or marriage, but as a reminder that you belong to this place, and this place belongs to you." Sarah extended her hand and Robert slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "How did you know my size?" "I observed your hands every night," he admitted. "I memorized every detail of them." Sarah looked at the ring on her hand, then at Robert. 7 days, she said. 7 days, he confirmed. I'm afraid. Of what? That when the time comes I won't be enough for you. That you'll realize we built something based on the fantasy of a dying man. Robert pulled her into his arms. Sarah, you're already more than enough. You're more than I dreamed was possible. How can you be so sure? Because when I wake up in the morning and see you by my side, I feel as if I've received a gift I didn't deserve. Because when you smile, I forget I'm dying. Because when you touch me, even if it's just your hand in mine, I feel as if I'm connected to something eternal. Sarah kissed him, and it was a different kiss. More urgent, more desperate, charged with all the love she felt and still hadn't fully expressed. Robert, she whispered against his lips, I want to start our honeymoon now. Our honeymoon? These last 7 days. I want them to be special. I want to do things that couples do. I want to pretend we have a lifetime ahead of us. What do you want to do? Sarah smiled, a mischievous smile he had never seen before. I want you to teach me how to make wine. I want to dance with you in the living room, even without music. I want you to tell me stories about your childhood. I want to cook for you. I want... She stopped, blushing. What? I want to take a bath with you. The suggestion made something contract in Robert's lower abdomen. Sarah, not to make love, not yet, but to get used to each other's bodies, to remove the mystery, the anxiety, so that when the time comes there's no strangeness. It was a proposal at once innocent and erotic, and Robert felt he couldn't refuse it even if he wanted to. Are you sure? I'm sure that I don't want to waste more time being shy about things that will be natural between us. That night, Sarah prepared a bath in the large tub of the master bedroom. She filled it with hot water, added scented salts she found in the cabinet, and lit candles around the small room. The atmosphere became intimate, almost sacred. When Robert entered the bathroom, she was already in the water, with her hair tied in a loose bun, shoulders and collarbones visible above the surface. She looked at him without embarrassment, but with a new vulnerability. Come, she said simply. Robert undressed slowly, and Sarah saw for the first time the extent of the damage the disease had caused to his body. He was thinner than she had imagined, and there was a fragility in his movements that made her want to protect him from the entire world. When he entered the tub sitting in front of her, Sarah extended her hand and touched his chest, tracing with her fingers the scars from surgeries, the marks from needles, the signs of a battle he was losing. You're beautiful, she said, and there was absolute truth in her voice. I'm destroyed, said Robert. No, said Sarah, continuing to caress him. You're being transformed, like wine, which needs to be destroyed to become something sublime. They stayed like this for an hour, talking softly, touching each other with tenderness, getting used to the physical intimacy that had been forbidden territory for so long. There was no sexual urgency, just a mutual discovery, a total acceptance. Sarah, said Robert while she washed his hair with delicate movements, do you know that I love you beyond any rational measure? I know, she said. And do you know that what I feel for you goes far beyond what words can express? I know. Then we're ready. Ready for what? Sarah leaned in and kissed his forehead. To be completely happy for the next 7 days. On the 23rd day, what Sarah feared most happened. She woke up alone in bed, and when she went to look for Robert, she found him unconscious on the bathroom floor. This time there was no avoiding it. She called the ambulance. At the Sonoma County Hospital, the doctor was brutally honest. The tumor has grown significantly. There are complications we didn't expect to see so early. We need to keep him here to control the pain and symptoms. For how long? Asked Sarah. Hard to say. Maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks. Sarah sat in the chair beside Robert's bed, who was sedated, and felt as if the world had collapsed. 5 days. Only 5 days remained of the original pact, and he was unconscious in a hospital bed. She remained by his side for 2 entire days, leaving only to shower and change clothes. On the 2nd day, Robert woke up. Sarah, I'm here, she said, taking his hand. How many days have we lost? 2. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're okay. Robert tried to sit up, but he was too weak. I'm not okay, Sarah, and we both know that. The doctors say you may recover enough to go home. And do you believe them? Sarah looked at his pale face, at the tubes that connected him to the machines, at the numbers on the monitors that kept flashing. "No," she admitted. "Then get me out of here. Robert, Sarah, please. I don't want to die here. And I don't want our last moments together to be in a hospital bed surrounded by strangers." Sarah looked around the sterile room, then back at Robert. "The doctors will never let you go. Then don't ask permission." It was madness. It was dangerous. It was potentially fatal. But Sarah saw the determination in Robert's eyes and knew he was right. If these were his last days, they should be lived at home in the place he loved, surrounded by the things that mattered. "What do you need me to do?" Robert smiled, the first genuine smile since he arrived at the hospital. "I need you to be the brave woman who fell in love with a dying man and decided that love is worth any risk." That night, Sarah executed the plan they had plotted during the afternoon. She waited until the nurses made their midnight rounds, then helped Robert dress and took him through the empty corridors to the emergency exit. William was waiting with the car, as they had arranged. The journey back to Napa Valley was silent, but charged with a fierce determination. Sarah held Robert's hand, who was visibly exhausted but also relieved. "How many days remain in our original agreement?" he asked. "3," said Sarah. "And you still want?" "More than anything in the world." When they arrived at the mansion, it was almost 3 in the morning. Sarah helped Robert up the stairs, and they lay together in the bed that had become the center of their world. "Sarah," said Robert, pulling her closer, "there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "If I die before the 30th day?" "You're not going to die." "If I die," he insisted, "I want you to know that you've already given me everything. These 27 days were worth more than the 63 years that preceded them." Sarah kissed his neck, his collarbones, his chest. "Then don't die yet. Give me 3 more days." "I'll try." "Promise?" "I promise I'll fight to stay alive until the 30th day." "And then?" Robert stroked her hair. "But then if it's my time to go, I'll go in peace, knowing that I loved and was completely loved." Sarah nestled against him, listening to the irregular beating of his heart. 3 days, she murmured. 3 days, agreed Robert. "And then I'll give myself to you completely. And I'll love you like no woman has ever been loved." "Promise?" "I promise." Outside, the rain began to fall softly on the vineyards, on the Lacrima Christi seedlings they had planted together, on the earth that would soon receive the last act of love between 2 souls who had found in each other the redemption they didn't know they were seeking. On the 28th day, Robert woke weaker than ever, but with a mental clarity that Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. It was as if, the closer to death, the more spiritually alive he became. "Good morning, love of my life," he said, and it was the first time he had called her that. "Good morning," replied Sarah, kissing his forehead. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm ready." "For what?" "To love you the way you deserve to be loved." Sarah felt her heart race. 2 days. 2 days, he confirmed. "And I want them to be perfect." "What do you want to do today?" Robert pulled her closer. "I want to write my last letter to you. I want you to read to me some of your favorite poems. I want us to dance one last time. And I want..." "What?" "I want you to tell me exactly how you want our last night to be. I want it to be exactly as you dreamed." Sarah blushed but didn't look away. "I want it to be slow. I want you to touch me as if it were the first time you touched a woman. I want it to be sacred." "And it will be," promised Robert. "It will be the most sacred thing we've ever done." And as the 28th day unfolded around them, loaded with promises and possibilities, Sarah and Robert prepared for what would be, at the same time, the beginning and the end of everything they had built together. The 29th day dawned with a dense fog that enveloped the mansion like an ethereal veil. Sarah woke before Robert and stayed watching his face while he slept. There was a peace in his features that she hadn't seen in weeks, but also a transparency that frightened her, as if he were becoming increasingly part of the air they breathed. When Robert opened his eyes, Sarah immediately saw that something had changed during the night. There was a supernatural clarity in his gaze, a luminosity that seemed to come from within. "How do you feel?" she asked, gently touching his face. "Like I'm seeing everything for the first time, and the last time at the same time," he replied. And his voice had a different quality, softer, more distant, but also more present. "Are you in pain?" "No. For the first time in months, I feel no pain at all." It was what Sarah feared most to hear. In her readings about cancer, She had learned that the sudden absence of pain often meant that the end was near. "Today is the penultimate day," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Today is the day we begin our eternity," corrected Robert, pulling her closer. They spent the morning doing simple things that gained a profound meaning through the awareness that they might be the last. They had coffee on the porch, watching the fog slowly dissipate from the vineyards. They walked among the vines, with Robert leaning on Sarah's arm, stopping to touch the leaves, feel the texture of the earth, breathe the pure air of the valley. "I want to write my final letter now," said Robert when they returned home. Sarah helped him settle in the office, where he spent 2 hours writing with an intensity she had never seen. His hands trembled slightly, but his handwriting remained firm and clear. "You can read it now if you want," he said when he finished, extending the paper to her. Sarah shook her head. "I'll read it tomorrow." "Afterward?" Robert nodded, understanding. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in the envelope he had prepared, with Sarah's name written on the front in neat letters. "There's one more thing I need to show you," he said. They left the house and walked toward a part of the property that Sarah rarely visited. It was a wilder area, where the old vines grew almost without human interference. In the middle of this section, Robert stopped in front of a parcel of freshly worked land. "What is this?" asked Sarah. "Remember the Lacrima Christi seedlings we planted together?" "Of course. Those were just the beginning. In the last few weeks, while you slept, William and I planted an entire vineyard. 2,000 seedlings." Sarah looked around the extensive area, now seeing the small stakes that marked where each seedling had been planted. It was an immense work, which should have taken weeks. "Robert, how did you manage to do this? You were so weak." "Love gave me strength I didn't know I had," he said simply. "I wanted to leave something growing, something that would flourish after I was gone." Sarah walked between the rows of seedlings, touching each stake, imagining what that place would be like in 5-10 years. It would be a sea of green, with bunches of dark grapes swaying in the breeze. "Why Lacrima Christi?" "Because they're grapes that are born from pain and transform into something sublime. Like us." Sarah turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "It's the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "It's not yet the most beautiful gift," said Robert, approaching her. "That comes tonight." The afternoon passed in a strange temporal suspension. Robert seemed to be saving energy for the night, sleeping for long periods, but always waking with a smile when he saw Sarah by his side. She spent the time organizing the house, preparing everything so the night would be perfect. At 6 in the evening, the ritual began. Sarah prepared a scented bath for Robert, helped him dress in clean and comfortable clothes, combed his hair with care. Then she took care of herself, taking a long bath, perfuming herself with the rose oil she had saved for this occasion, wearing the simple white dress she had bought in town without him knowing. When she went down to the dining room, she found Robert waiting for her. He was sitting at the table, which had been set with the family's most beautiful porcelain, candles lit, fresh flowers from the garden. There was an open bottle of wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon, from the first vintage he himself had produced. "You look stunning," he said when he saw her, and there was a reverence in his voice that made her feel like a bride. "You look handsome too," she replied, and it was true. Despite the illness, there was a dignity in Robert that thinness couldn't diminish. They dined slowly, savoring each bite, each sip of wine, each word exchanged. They talked about the future of the vineyards, about the therapeutic garden that Sarah would create, about how she would remember him. "I don't want you to live in the past," said Robert, holding her hand across the table. "I want you to live fully, to love again if you find someone worthy of your love." "Don't talk about that tonight," asked Sarah. "I need to talk about it. I need you to promise that you won't become a professional widow, keeping eternal mourning for a love that lasted only 30 days. Sarah squeezed his hand. "I promise I'll live, but I also promise I'll never forget what you taught me about love." "What did I teach you?" "That true love isn't possession, it's freedom. That loving someone is seeing them for who they really are and choosing to stay anyway. That it's possible to build a lifetime of meaning in 30 days. After dinner, they danced. Robert had put soft music on the old record player, and they moved slowly across the living room, embraced as if they were one person. Sarah could feel the fragility of his body, but also the strength of his presence, the intensity of his love for her. "Is it time?" he asked when the music ended. Sarah looked into his eyes and nodded. It's time. They climbed the stairs slowly, unhurried. In the bedroom, Sarah had prepared everything carefully, candles scattered on the dresser, rose petals on the bed, soft incense perfuming the air. The atmosphere was sacred, ritualistic. Robert sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Sarah to stand in front of him. With trembling hands, he began to unbutton her dress, kissing each inch of skin that was revealed. Sarah closed her eyes, lost in sensations she hadn't experienced for so long. "Are you sure?" he asked when the dress fell to the floor. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied. Sarah helped him undress, and they lay together on the bed that had been prepared with such care. What happened next was more than physical union. It was a communion of souls that transcended any experience either of them had lived before. Robert touched her, as if she were made of precious glass, as if each caress were a prayer of gratitude. Sarah gave herself completely, without reservations, without fear, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered against his lips as they became one body. "I love you beyond life, beyond death, beyond time," he replied, moving inside her with a tenderness that made her cry from pure emotion. They made love slowly, intensely, as if they wanted to engrave each second in eternal memory. There was no urgency, only a total surrender that connected them in a way that transcended the physical. When they finally reached the climax together, it was as if the entire universe aligned for a moment. Sarah felt as if she were dissolving and reconstituting at the same time, as if she were dying and being born simultaneously. Afterward, they lay intertwined, breathing in sync, hearts beating in the same rhythm. "How do you feel?" asked Robert, caressing her hair. "Like I've found the purpose of my existence," replied Sarah. "And you?" "Like I've fulfilled the purpose of my existence." They fell asleep embraced, and Sarah had dreams of flowering vineyards, of children running among the vines, of a future that was at once impossible and inevitable. Sarah woke with the first rays of sun on the 30th day. For a moment she experienced a pure happiness as she remembered the previous night. But when she turned to embrace Robert, she found a silence that made her stop breathing. He was lying on his side, facing her, with a small but genuine smile on his lips. His eyes were closed, and there was an absolute peace in his features. But when Sarah touched his face, she felt that he was cold. "Robert," she whispered, knowing there would be no response. He had departed during the night, while sleeping in her arms, exactly as he had promised, in peace, without pain, without fear, without regrets. Sarah didn't scream, didn't panic. Instead, she remained lying beside him for an hour, memorizing every detail of his face, whispering words of love and gratitude. She knew that this moment, waking up beside the man she loved for the last time, was sacred and needed to be honored properly. Finally, she got up, put on a robe, and went to the desk where Robert had left the final letter. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. "My beloved Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I departed during the night, as I expected. Don't be saddened for me. I died in the happiest possible way in the arms of the woman I love after a night that was worth a lifetime. There are things I need to tell you while my words can still reach you. First, you saved me. Not from death, because that was always inevitable, but from the feeling that my life had been wasted. You taught me that love isn't something we possess, but something we choose to give. You showed me that it's possible to live an entire existence in 30 days, if those days are lived with truth and courage. Second, you are stronger than you imagine. I know the next months will be difficult, that there will be moments when you'll question your choices, when you'll miss me in a physical way. But I also know that you have within you a strength that was forged by adversity and tempered by love. Use that strength to build the life you always deserved to have. Third, the Lacrima Christi vineyard is my final gift to you, but also my way of continuing to exist in the world. When these grapes grow and produce wine, it will be as if I were whispering my love through the centuries. Each bottle will be a love letter I left for you. Fourth, there's a secret I kept until now. Yesterday, while you were sleeping, I received a call from the laboratory where we did some tests 2 weeks ago. The results arrived. Sarah, my love, you're pregnant. I know this news will arrive along with my departure, and that it will be devastating and wonderful at the same time. But I want you to know that this child is the miracle I didn't dare to dream of. It's the proof that our love created life, that something of me will continue to exist through you. If it's a girl, call her Hope. If it's a boy, call him Thomas, in honor of the son I lost. And tell this child about the 30 days when their parents were completely happy. Fifth, don't be afraid of the future. The inheritance I left for you isn't a prison, it's freedom. Use it to create the therapeutic garden you always dreamed of. Use it to help other people who, like us, need to learn that they are worthy of love. Use it to be the extraordinary woman you always were, but who never had the opportunity to flourish. Sixth, when you miss me, walk through the vineyards. I'll be there, in each leaf that sways in the wind, in each grape that ripens in the sun, in each bottle of wine that carries my love to the world. Seventh, love again, when it's time. Not out of obligation to move on, but because a heart that has learned to love truly should never stop loving. And when you find someone worthy of your love, don't be afraid to give your heart completely. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. Lastly, thank you. Thank you for seeing beauty in a destroyed man. Thank you for teaching me that being worthwhile isn't about time, but about intensity. Thank you for loving me without pity, without conditions, without reservations. Thank you for giving me the most perfect night of my life. Thank you for being exactly who you are. To plant is to accept that what is true needs time. And you, Sarah, are truth. With eternal love, Robert P.S. My ashes should be scattered in the Lacrima Christi vineyard, so I can continue growing along with our love. Sarah finished reading the letter with tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Unconsciously, she brought her hand to her abdomen, where a new life was beginning to grow. A life created by the purest love she had ever experienced. 3 days later, Sarah was at the top of the hill where the ancestral altar of the Blackwoods was located, surrounded by a small group of people who had loved Robert. Jessica had come from New York. Sister Beatrice was present, as were Mrs. Martha, William, and other longtime employees of the property. Robert always said that this was the place where he felt closest to something greater than himself, said Sarah, holding the urn with his ashes. Now he will be part of this place forever. She opened the urn and began to scatter the ashes over the Lacrima Christi vineyard, where the young seedlings were sprouting promisingly from the rich earth. The gentle wind carried part of the ashes away, spreading them over the old vineyards, over the distant mountains, over the infinite sky. Rest in peace, my love, whispered Sarah. And thank you for teaching me that 30 days can contain an eternity. 6 months later, Sarah was on the porch of the house, now truly hers, observing the vineyards that extended to the horizon. Her belly was rounded with the 6-month pregnancy, and she could feel the baby moving restlessly, as if recognizing the time of day when she always came to contemplate the view. The therapeutic garden was almost ready. Sarah had hired a landscaper, specializing in medicinal plants, and together they had created a space that was both beautiful and functional. She already received visits from people in the region who came seeking peace and healing among the flowers that Sarah cultivated with such care. The Lacrima Christi seedlings were growing vigorously. William said he had never seen young vines develop so quickly. It's as if the earth were in a hurry to produce this wine, he had commented the previous week. A letter had arrived that morning from an Italian importer interested in buying the future production of the Lacrima Christi vineyard. Apparently, the news that the variety had been replanted in Napa Valley had reached specialized circles of rare wines. Sarah smiled, imagining how proud Robert would be. His legacy was flourishing exactly as he had planned. Daddy would have been very happy to know that you're thriving, she said, caressing her belly. The tests had revealed it would be a girl, and Sarah had already chosen the name, Hope Blackwood Miller. Yes, she had decided to use the Blackwood surname, not because of the inheritance or social position, but because she wanted her daughter to know she was born of a true love, that she carried the blood of a man who had loved completely in the last days of his life. A gentle breeze brought the aroma of flowers from the therapeutic garden, mixed with the sweet smell of grapes that were beginning to form in the old vineyards. It was a unique perfume that Sarah had learned to associate with peace and hope. That night, as she did every night since Robert's death, Sarah walked through the vineyards before going to sleep. It was her moment to talk with him, to share the events of the day, to feel his presence in the plants he had loved so much. Today I received a marriage proposal, she said, standing in front of the Lacrima Christi seedlings. Dr. David, the doctor who has been taking care of my pregnancy. He's a good, kind man, would be a good father to Hope. She paused, listening to the wind whisper among the leaves. I said no, of course. I'm not ready yet. Perhaps I'll never be ready to love as I loved you. But you taught me that the heart has infinite capacity, so maybe one day. Sarah knelt and touched the earth where Robert's ashes had been scattered. The earth was soft, fertile, full of promises. Thank you, she whispered, for teaching me that I am worthy of love, for giving me our daughter, for leaving me this place, these vineyards, this life that I never thought I could have. A tear fell from her eyes onto the earth, and Sarah swore she saw one of the seedlings move slightly, as if it were being caressed by an invisible breeze. She stood up and walked back to the house, one hand protecting the womb where Hope was growing strong and healthy. On the porch, she stopped to look once more at the vineyards bathed in moonlight. In 3 years, the first Lacrima Christi grapes would be ready. In 5 years, there would be the first true vintage. In 10 years, the wine would be mature, carrying within it the taste of longing that Robert had promised. And Sarah would be there for each stage, taking care of the legacy they had created together, raising the daughter who was living proof that 30 days of true love can generate an eternity of happiness. Some seeds, she murmured, echoing the words she had thought on the day Robert died, even planted at the end, bloom for all eternity. And with that certainty in her heart, Sarah entered the house, where life continued, where love had left roots too deep to be destroyed by death, where each new day was a gift that Robert had given her by teaching her that she deserved to be loved. Outside, the vineyards whispered in the night wind, carrying promises of future harvests, of wines that would tell the story of a love that transformed absence into presence, pain into gratitude, end into beginning. And in the mountains of Napa Valley, where the stars seemed closer to earth, the love of Robert and Sarah continued growing, one row of seedlings at a time, one season at a time, one healed heart at a time, for all eternity.